Hi everybody, and thanks so much for joining us. Joining us for this month's installment of On My Mind, brought to you with support from the Headspace app. I am Ash King. I'm a former muso and resident psychologist with Support Act, and we're very grateful for all of you being here today. So this month's pretty special. We are very proud to be partnering with Black Music Alliance Australia for today's session, Being Black in Australian Music. In this session, Support Act is celebrating the courageous, diverse, and groundbreaking talent of Australian, African artists and creatives. And we're going to be exploring how cultural and societal norms, stigma, expectations, and prejudice intersect to impact mental health, identity, music, and creativity. Here at Support Act, we also love to acknowledge the unique and important legacy of Australians' First Nations communities. We are grateful to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that we each live, work, and thrive on. For me, I recognise the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I welcome any First Nations guests joining us today and pay my respects to First Nations people and elders past, present, and emerging. Support Act are also dedicated to providing personalised support and resources to Aussie music industry workers. You can find all of our stuff online at supportact.org.au, and you can also call our free confidential helpline at 1800 959 500 for advice and support about anything from mental health issues, financial well-being, work and relationships, and we have specialised support for managers, First Nations people, and for LGBTQI issues. So over onto what's on the menu for this session of On My Mind. Joining us on the panel, we've got some incredible guests. We've got artist, singer-songwriter Thando, who tells stories of love and loss through the lens of the Black woman and motherhood. Welcome, Thando, and thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. I'm really looking forward to these discussions and hopefully sharing and learning some of that experience.
For sure. We've also got manager and co-founder of DB Music, Zig Annor. Zig has helped countless artists make a career of music, operating in management, record labels, marketing, and he's now involved in the new hip-hop station, Cater. He continues to knock down doors for the scene. Welcome, Zig.
What's going on? What's going on? Pleasure to be here, and thank you guys for having me. Excited for the chat, for sure.
And we have Enfa Jones, an Australian Sierra Leonean music artist, MC, and lecturer credited for helping establish the Australian hip-hop scene with his ARIA award-winning band 1200 Techniques. Hey there.
Hey, you hear me all good? Pleasure to be here.
We are also lucky to be joined on the panel today by some mental health practitioners who've done incredible work in this space. We've got senior researcher and psychotherapist, Dr. Kathomi Gatwiri, an expert on issues of race, racial microaggressions, racial trauma, and racial dignity. Hi, Dr. Kathomi. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
And finally, I'm going to be handing over today's panel to be facilitated by a friend and psychologist who does a great deal of work supporting Aussie creatives and music industry workers at Flow State Space, Rashida Dungarwalla. Hey, Rashida.
Hi, Ash. Hi, everyone else. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to host today.
Over to you. Let's get stuck into all the great stuff that we can explore in today's session. And anyone joining us from home, if you have questions or you'd like to throw something to one of our panelists, chuck it in the chat or chuck it in the Q&A of our Zoom, and I'll pass it over to Rashida to bring to our guests.
Okay, let's get into it. Well, again, thank you so much for having me. I really look forward to this conversation we're about to have. I really hope that these questions, obviously lead us. They're going to be leading us into so many great, thoughtful and thought-provoking topics. So let's get into it. I think the first question I would love to ask is, a lot of our attendees might already know, but for those that might not, how did some of you find your pathway into the music industry, into the creative space? And how much of an influence, or what type of an influence, did your cultural identity have on you entering the music industry and the creative space? Who would like to start? Maybe I'll chuck it to Thando.
Me, okay. I have only ever been surrounded by music. I think that's sort of been the only constant in my life from childhood and, going into adulthood. Music has played such an important part in my life. I was raised in the church, so a big part of, obviously, my family's identity and connection to culture was through music, through the church. Gospel music informed a lot of what I know of myself as an artist. And I think because it's the only thing I was ever really good at, I didn't really see any other option besides being a musician. So I've been able to go into it passionately. I think what's been a bit of a struggle is culturally, there isn't really, like, there are different priorities as far as my background, as far as, what you should do for career. So, coming home and telling my family that I wanted to be a musician as my profession wasn't something that they really understood or could support or get behind at the beginning, because like that wasn't a job as far as they were concerned. That was just something for fun and something that you did on the side. So I think there's always been a bit of a struggle there, trying to have them understand, the impact of the kind of work that we do, and how it might, how it might sort of set a precedent in the scene. So it's been really interesting watching myself, I guess, go from learning and being a mentor and sort of transitioning into more of a leader within my own community as well. And just how, my upbringing and, I guess, not lack of support, but lack of understanding in those sort of crucial developmental stages has sort of shaped the artist that I am, and has become a huge part of my identity. So I think it's a really long-winded question of saying music is the only thing I was ever good at, and my family didn't get it, but they're slowly getting there. So yeah.
Thank you for your vulnerability. I'm sure that, the answers to this question are going to require some vulnerability, and that's such an amazing journey. I think I would say probably not the only thing that you're good at, but one of the things that you're the best at, I'm sure. But that's a really inspiring journey. What about Zig? What was your journey or pathway like?
Yeah, I think for me growing up, I think until the age of around 15, 16, like I was kind of lost in identity. Growing up, not having many other African Australians around me really in the area I grew up in. But at that point is when I started hanging around my cousins a lot more, who were a couple of years older than me, and they were into the hip hop scene, and they were doing music and stuff like that. And their group was called K1. So one of the members, for instance, is B Wise, who was in there, and a few others. And they inspired me really. And a lot of their emphasis and their kind of ethos was around being proud to be African Australian, and that's kind of what really inspired me at that point, because I think we all kind of went through it. There was a point where, we'd look at a lot of the American influences, and there was points where, especially when guys started rapping, it's in an American accent, or, just, things like that, and just even how we dress and stuff. But as we grew through teenage years, like we started to realize, hey, being African Australian is just as cool, you know what I mean? So why don't we just be us, So, and that's what really inspired me. From there, I started DJing for them, and they got me into DJing. And at that point, I was around 18. I always had a vision that I wanted to be doing radio and create a platform where I can actually support artists out there. And from there, the journey went from DJing to then managing and doing radio, and, where we're at now, just like supporting a lot of artists, and now gone full 360 where I'm back on radio and in a good position where I can actually have some influence as well. So yeah, that's kind of my journey through the music industry. In a nutshell, there's a lot to it, but yeah.
I know I've started off with a question that probably could take up the entire time of the panel, but I think it's a great place to start, because these are such inspiring journeys, and it sounds like through you all having a few people in your life that you could look to has obviously carved a pathway for yourselves, and now you're being that person for other people. So I think it's great for our attendees who may be seeking, a pathway for themselves to be able to hear what it was. Enfa, what about you? What was your journey like?
Well, as a young child, like infant stages, I had a really solid identity. I was born in London. I was growing up on Old Brompton Road. My father had a Sierra Leonean and Creole restaurant. There was music downstairs. My mother was Australian. I had heaps of African family coming around all the time. I had my big brother, my big sister, my different father, big sister. But there was a real sense of, okay, this is what I'm growing up to be. And then a lot of crazy things happened, and suddenly I'm living in Australia with just my brother and my mom. And it's not like a thing, you know, obviously I've had to work on that a bit. And, you know, you go through like blame and what happened, and you go, okay, it's just life, things happen. It sucks. But that identity was gone. And, but coming to Australia, it was such a strange new space. And I mean, I loved it because I loved the warmth and the hills. I didn't really understand what was going on. I was too young. But there was definitely a difference between like my brother and I and everybody else, especially in the hills of Perth. There was, you know, just, you know, Aussies. And then once we sort of, there was a couple of other cultures around. There wasn't even a lot of Noongar kids where I was, even though we were on this beautiful region. But once we moved down the hill into Swan View, there was high Noongar population. So I started really connecting with that as a Black connection, but it became pretty apparent quite quickly that I wasn't that either. They were cool with me, and they loved me, but I wasn't that. I'd get to play in basketball tournaments, you know, hey, come see my cousin, all that. But still, it wasn't mine. And I wasn't part of the white culture, though half of my family was white. And I couldn't grab onto the Black culture because they weren't there. And so for me and my brother, the real sense became when we'd always loved a group called Musical Youth, and that song, Pastor Dutchie. I used to sing it all the time as a kid. I got reminded of it recently. And we had a couple of albums, Quincy Jones, The Dude, Off the Wall. I can't remember which Bob Marley record, Count Basie, big band record. And that was about it. And I used to listen to them on repeat. Oh, and Manu Dibango album, as Soma Kosa and all that. So I started getting a sense of just connection to music and sports, really. And the music kept building. And once we started seeing all these album covers with these young, fresh faces, kind of LL looking like this, and Rakim like that, MC Light all cool, we started getting drawn to that. And then we were seeing UK artists like MC Dukes and all these different people from around the world who were rapping, and we just fell in love with it. And for us, that's where we connected with more than our neighborhood. Mm-hmm. It was like an imaginary world we could go to. It was literally so imaginary. To me, it was like, I played basketball, but you'd see the NBA and it was like, that's not realistic. It doesn't really exist for real normal humans. That's just this Hubble world, you know? Mm-hmm. And so it was even the same with music, but we loved it so much. We just kept always doing it. No one liked hip hop or rap where I lived. It was like, oh, you rappers and what's that stuff? We didn't care. And I think maybe I was about 10. My brother must have been 15, 16. He started finding other people that were dressing a bit like we did. Just randomly, you'd see them in the city, so you'd talk to them. And so you kind of built a culture of whatever friends you could find that had the same interests, to the point where, like, there was a point where my Black friends were Filipino, Indian, Noongar, the white kid who liked hip hop. You know what I mean? That's how it was where we were at that point. And so that path really brought me forward. And having an older brother who just loved music, it was a sense of expression. He would meet other older musicians. He'd roll through to do stuff with them, and he'd drag me along as his little bro. And that became a sort of sense of community and identity that I loved. You know, I loved athletics as well. But it was always this connection to Black culture. I didn't really know what to access as far as African culture at the time. I just had Manu Dibango albums, and I'd look in books and try and research and stuff, but everything felt like a faraway world. Mm-hmm. But that drive and love to music, the rhyme schemes, and the positive culture of hip hop, the actual culture, I'm not just talking rap music and people rapping, I mean the culture, really helped give me a direction to through the music and to my Blackness.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. On that same sort of topic, Dr. Kathomi, why is cultural understanding integral to our connection and to further understanding?
Yeah, it's interesting hearing where everybody kind of got their interest and drive from. It got me thinking how much of our outlook is really inherently influenced by environment and our relationships, not just, our families, but also our friends and also the places that we grow up, Yeah. So if you grow up in a place that values a certain kind of art, how much does that influence the way you view the world and how you express through that art? But research, there's lots of evidence that shows that our outlook of the world is inherently influenced by our environment, and a huge part of our identity is culturally and socially shaped. So sometimes when we think about creativity, we often think about music, we think about art, we think about fashion, but creativity is really the science of imagination. It's the permission to imagine yourself, sometimes even outside of your own reality. It's a space that you can enter, especially when your reality is oppressive or when your reality is small. You can use your imagination to go into different places, and that could be through music or art. So really, if you can imagine, then you can create. And what I'm hearing from all the artists here today is they had opportunities to imagine themselves outside of, like Thando was saying, outside of the family expectations, and to imagine herself in this role, and everybody else who was saying about what they imagined themselves outside of the expectations that were set after them. So, of course, culture influences how we imagine and, of course, how we create. I mean, when I'm thinking about when you listen to a lot of traditional African music, pre-colonization, you listen to all these old songs that are really stories, and they tell stories about ethics, about morality, about respect, about nature, about relationships, about going to the farm, about childbirth, about sex, about, so much stuff, and it's all incorporated into the kind of stories people told, the art they drew, the way they related with each other. And when that culture was changed by colonization or religion, even the music changed, the art changed. So, that's why I said at the beginning, the environment shapes how we imagine. When we think about Black American music during slavery or during colonization, a lot of the songs were about liberation and about freedom, because that was the environment and the culture that people were living in, same as a lot of South African music during those difficult times. So circumstances, the environment, the social reality shapes how people imagine. And a lot of people use their imagination to escape a reality or to really solidify a reality that is beautiful, and they want to memorialize that experience if it's a beautiful one. As Black people, we do sing a lot about, our identity and about our cultures, because that is very integral to how we are raised, how we see the world, and how we create, and also how we imagine, and I'm interested in hearing what really influences the artists here today to create, and, outside of what they've already shared. Yeah,
I'm glad this is getting recorded, this session, because that's an amazing answer. Thank you so much. That does lead to sort of the next question that I had around how do the artists that we have here today, how do you manage the vulnerability in sharing your artistic work that is so tied with so connected and tied deeply with your identity? Is there difficulties in the vulnerability it requires to put that out there, or is it actually something that, is not that difficult? Thando?
I think for myself, it's taken me a really long time to be able to be honest with myself about, my feelings about things, and processing, doing a lot of work, working on myself and my mental health. And I think I came up in a way where I wasn't offered the space to be able to explore, things like, having anxiety and, what depression looks like and how mental health plays obviously a really big part in the way your life shapes up. And it's not until I was an adult that I was actually able to start doing that work on myself. So I always found that through my music was kind of a way of being able to express a lot of those things and to explore a lot of those things. So it's been difficult in that I know that once you put something out there, you can't take it back. And it sort of starts a lot of conversations. Like, I'll get people who come to my more intimate shows and, they get the opportunity to like really listen to the lyrics and come up and talk to me after the show and tell me how a song that I sang sort of brought something up for them that they, hadn't thought about for a while. And then to have those conversations with people in a really frank way. I think it just kind of speaks on the power of music to be able to just create that dialogue and to create that space of safety where someone can come and, I guess, connect with you in that way. I think it's a really big part of, the rapport building that ends up sort of happening between artist and fan. It's a really big responsibility though. And I think it's knowing when to pull yourself out of that and how much of yourself to give in those sort of situations. Because, you don't have to sort of take on that emotional labor every time. You need to obviously get up and perform the material. And if it brings something up for people, just to sort of allow them the space to have that moment of introspection for them and to not need to come and sort of discuss that with you, because it's like, I've done my service to you by, preparing that space, helping you have that moment. You can take this away and process it in your own time. But as I've gotten older and I've come to terms with a lot of what has made me the way that I am, I'm less reluctant to share. I found my music's a lot more honest now. So I'm not trying to suppress anything and I'm not trying to represent anything other than what I am. And I think the older I've gotten, the less I care what I'm perceived as. So it's been a lot easier to be able to just share. So I mean that's where I'm at with that. But yeah, I know that it'll be different for everyone. I think it also depends on your approach to the creation of your music. Are you drawing from personal experience or are you writing about what you observe? I can only ever create from what I've lived, because it's the only way I can sort of be authentic. Because I've tried it every other way, and listen, you can always tell. You're like, you don't know what you're talking about. So yeah, that's been my experience.
Do you ever create or write something and then not put it out there and keep it for yourself just as a way of that expression?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think a big part of it is being able to keep something for yourself. There's stuff though that I did sort of stuff that I've created in the past that I had no intention of putting out there. And years later, I've revisited it and I guess been able to see where my headspace was at the time that I wrote it. And now I'm in a different place. I can kind of articulate those thoughts and feelings a bit better. And then I've put it out. So there's always some kind of version of it that exists for people to be able to consume. But a lot of things definitely do start off as things just for myself. And then they're the things that have turned out to be what has connected with people the most. So yeah, that authenticity definitely helps with making genuine connections with people.
For sure. Thank you. What about Enfa? Do you have a similar approach, or do you how is your vulnerability in putting things out there?
It's changed over the years. I always wanted things to be kind of good and right and finished, but I didn't really know what that was when I was developing myself. The worst song on the first 1200 Techniques album to the best song, all of it was just sort of experimenting with somebody that I sort of just got to know and found intriguing, and their beats were interesting. So, you definitely have a sense when you make something great, you're like, oh, that's a good one. But you don't know if it's going to be received. Whereas, as you move on, sometimes I found myself often getting sort of a little misled not like anyone was out to mislead me or me mislead myself, but misled on what other people thought was cool that I'd done. So by my first album, Cause and Effect, there's a couple songs in the album, one in particular that was a single, but I didn't really want it on the album. It was just an experiment. I'd freestyled most of it. It was an idea. It was I thought ended up being like a video single, and people really were liking it, but then it didn't get received properly because it actually didn't really match who I was and what I was trying to do creatively, and it kind of threw me off. And it's happened a number of times because I'm just so open to like, oh well, let's just release stuff. Oh yeah, I was hanging with people. I want to release something cool. And it's just kind of, I've often found you kind of end up all over the place versus just deciding on a path I want to walk and walk it. I think that path happens once you take yourself seriously as a musician. Even with ARIA Awards, I was like, yeah, but this isn't really real, right? I have to figure out what I'm going to do. And every time I would then try and knock down another door, another wall, I just was so often met with blockages. Like it's pretty hard when you're in mid-20s and you got like a major national radio station, you know what I'm saying we won't play your music. And it's like, what am I supposed to do? So that sort of step slowly led me to wanting to just write stuff that I felt was authentic, but there was a part of me that was continuing to experiment. And I felt like I've often had songs on albums that were, you know, just throw an album off because they kind of suit an idea versus what the project is. So, and that often can end up, you know, hurting my feelings, I guess. And I probably would say I have 3 of my best ever songs never got released. And that's also, you know, affected me. So now I'm so pretty hardcore about, I'm not writing anything for like radio listenership or anything. I just write for me, my couple of friends, and if anyone else gets it, that's great. But I can't please everybody. I refuse to try. I tried, and all I've ever got was, you know, like when you're a kid or something, you try to be everyone's friend, and someone just hates you. You have to get to the point where you're like, you know what? I don't need you all to like me. Yeah. I got one mate. I'm good. You know, so it's kind of the same with my vulnerability and what I share. I am very vulnerable what I share, but it's interesting. I was realizing I've never really told my story, as in where I grew up, atrocities I've seen, how poor I've been. I've never mentioned being homeless, none of it. And yet I've experienced it all. So I guess I do hide a lot.
You mean you put it in your music?
Yeah, I haven't lent into that. And I think there is an uncertainty around it. It has been a lot of pain. So I've always tried to write songs about a global uplift and betterment of people, you know, because I think that was like a safe space for me. But, you know, I think you have to find your way and figure out where's comfortable. It really depends on the individual, but for me, I'm trying to get more and more closer to myself and cultural identity and self-recognition and things that people probably figure I have, but no, it's been a pretty lonely walk.
Okay. Well, I mean, this is vulnerable even in just sharing that here today.
I guess so.
It's the practice of it. What about using, what's your experience been like in vulnerability in the creative space?
I think I'm more in the back end. Like I don't necessarily create the songs myself and stuff. So I think I'm very spread out in general. But I mean, where there's a chance to support, you know, someone who's African Australian, like, you know, I'd always love to, and I always do. And I think even just for me, it's more about influencing a lot of the artists to be proud in what they do and tell their story, you know. And, you know, I can remember even some key chats that I've had with a lot of artists where it's just like, yo, like, you know, you're dope, man. Like, you know, if you could just make it a bit more Aussie, or like, and some artists don't even speak Aussie necessarily, so it's not even like it is. But I feel like just the way that like people from here and a younger kid can look at that and be like, yeah, like that guy's like me, you know what I mean? And I've had those chats with people, and I've seen it reflected in the music, and I've seen people's journey really progress from there. And it gives us self-confidence to just be true to who you are. And I feel like that's what I love doing, is just giving that kind of vim to people where I can, because that's what influenced me when I was growing up, is like seeing my cousins do that in the first place. And they did it so early for them. That was around 2005, 6, 7, and now look where the scene has got to now. If anything, we need it more so right now, more than ever, So yeah, that's kind of my take on it. Yeah.
We want to see ourselves represented back.
Yeah.
So that
100%.
Yeah. So in terms of the next question, Dr. Kathomi, what are you seeing in terms of, with your clients that you work with, some of the challenges that you're regularly seeing when it comes to race, identity, culture, and maybe even the creative space?
I mean, that's a really broad question. And I think everybody has touched on a little bit of what, we talk about. I've been pretty lucky to be a researcher in the university, researching this area, but also to be a practicing psychotherapist working with people around the same stuff. So it's, research meets practice, and it's always like an interesting sweet spot there where you can see research in real time. And some of the things that I often hear about, particularly with Black people, because my practice mostly looks after Black people and people of color, and the way they experience their identity in white majority contexts, is the concept of racial trauma, which I think a lot of people would be familiar with. And I remember when I went to, psych school, there was nothing, I don't know about you, Rashida, but I don't think we were taught anything about racial trauma, Trauma actually wasn't really a part of our training. And so part of this came to me because, it's stuff that was coming up in my research, and I had to look at it and going, this is showing up everywhere that I look. And racial trauma is really that accumulated impact of living in a body that is constantly racially targeted or stressed or assaulted by racism. And sometimes, when we think about racism, we often think about those very explicit, overt, kinds, but really most of the stuff, very few people come to me to talk about very explicit stuff, right? What people mostly struggle with is the microaggressions, the coded racism, where now they're left with the emotional burden of interpreting the coded messages within the racial lingo that they experience out there. And they're like, am I crazy? Am I overreacting? And this gaslighting that happens is like, am I reading into this too much? Is this what? And I find that that is where most of the burden actually happens, is in the microaggressions, because with explicit stuff, people can just go, you're just weird. I'm not even going to engage with you. Go away. Because it's just so bizarre, and people can kind of make sense of it in the here and now. With the coded aspects of dealing with race, it's the labor of interpretation is, befalls on you. And if you interpret it in a way that feels accurate to you, a lot of people are then gaslighted. It's not what I meant, or you're interpreting it wrong. And a lot of people end up experiencing this racial confusion of why do I feel that this is true for me, but then I'm being told it's not an accurate interpretation? And it's a huge psychological distress for a lot of people. So we work through that, learning how to code racial microaggression, but also learning how to develop what we call racial resilience, because I'm not here to solve racism. I've never claimed that I'm here to solve it, and it's not my job to solve it. But really what we can do is to have confidence in being able to understand the language of racism in its most coded layers, but not really to be disempowered by it, but to develop a sense of, I'm confident when I know that is what that feels for me. And this is how I develop racial dignity in the context of all these things that I'm facing. So to develop some sense of dignity and resilience in the face of all those things. I mean, that's one of the things that we talk about. I mean, you know, for a lot of people who are sharing here, music is your bread and butter, and music is actually your workplace. So what a lot of people come to me is the struggles of the workplace and how that shows up. But and also what I realize is that racial trauma impacts our capacity sometimes to imagine, you know, and this is what trauma-informed practice actually shows us. You know, when you expose trauma to little children, their focus is on being safe, you know, and their imagination is mostly about imagining safety, not to imagine thriving and not to imagine all those things. And it's the same thing with creativity when it comes to Black creators. You see that a lot of the music and a lot of the art is really about imagining survival, you know, and healing, not about thriving. And I know a lot of people say there's great music that comes out of trauma. And to some extent, I can see that. We've gotten good art and good music that has come from suffering and pain and trauma. But I also want to encourage a lot of our artists to also create from a place of Black joy. You know, I want to see more joy. I want to see more laughing. I want to hear more about Black love. I want to see about our resilience in our communities. We can also create from that place. But because our communities have been so traumatized by so many things in the world, there's a lot of art that comes from a place of pain. And so that's what I wanted to, you asked about how does this, you know, impact creativity, but I don't subscribe to that school of thought that every beautiful piece of art needs to come from trauma. And I think there's beauty that can come out of love and joy and laughter and resilience, and those two narratives can coexist. You know, both pain and love can coexist, both suffering and joy can coexist, and that's a story that we can hold. But finally, I just wanted to mention something Thando, you know, talked about in terms of vulnerability and how hard it is sometimes to be vulnerable in our art. And that's a real thing that I see is, I think over the last few years, maybe the last decade, we've been, you know, the pop culture has been proliferated by messages about vulnerability. It is great to be vulnerable. It is wonderful to be vulnerable. It is the birthplace of creativity and joy. And I hear that, but what I'm going to say is not a but, it's an and. When we've not created safe spaces for Black people to be vulnerable, we can't ask them to perform that labor and then not hold that vulnerability with care, you know? And I think because of the work that I do, I see that most racialized communities or contexts do not do a very good job of holding Black vulnerability. You know, when Black women are vulnerable, they're seen a certain way. When Black men are vulnerable, they're seen a certain way. So we cannot just be feeling messages in pop culture asking people to be vulnerable and asking them basically to expose their pain and their trauma and their suffering to us, when we've not done the job as a culture to be able to hold that vulnerability with care and compassion and support. So I think there needs to be a balance between how much can I share in a way that is still safe for me and still supports me to be safe, because once it's out there and it's not held with care, what it's going to do is going to immediately re-traumatize you and potentially be worse for your mental health. And so, you know, there's there's a small balance between vulnerability and the outcome of the vulnerability hangover, which is when you share and then, you know, the next morning you're in a fetal position in your kitchen because you feel that it wasn't held in a way that brought you comfort. So that's what I wanted to share. I hope it's feels relevant or resonates to people.
Definitely. Thank you so much. I have a similar conversation with a lot of my clients about how do we decipher what is comfortable for them on a personal level, about where is the line going to be in what you share and what you keep sacred to yourself and what you keep close to yourself. And it's totally okay to have things kept, you know, on the line of being personal to you rather than putting it out there. Excellent. Thank you so much. On talking about creating from a space of love, joy, and that side of things, what is some of your most cherished and memorable moments in being part of the Aussie music industry or the creative industry? And can you share some of those moments? Zig, I'll start with you.
Yeah, good question. There's a lot of memories, I think, to be honest. I think one that stands out for me is like working with someone like Sampa the Great and her winning at the Arias, for instance. That was like such a dope moment. And I feel like it just felt like there's a shift, you know. I think that's even what was exciting about it. It felt like we're in a new era, we're in a new age, and there's new energy out there. At that point, it was disappointing that it didn't get aired on TV and things like that, which was a big part of like, you know, it was such a big moment, but then it wasn't even like shared properly. But I think that just shows the challenges that we still got to go through. I think as well, like, you know, touring with someone like Sampa the Great overseas and seeing the international reaction and reception. Same with someone like Manu Crooks as well, who, you know, I've known since he was like 14, 15, you know, so I've really seen him grow as an artist and, you know, going to places like one that really stood out was we got booked for a gig in Greece, Thessaloniki. It's like a place we've never heard of. And we just go there and like, these people don't even necessarily speak English as their first language, but they'll sing the words. And it's just like how, like, you know, at a sold out show, like, and at that point it was just like, wow, like we're actually doing this, you know, and that was like pretty early for the scene as well, you know, especially for the new wave scene, you know, with the kind of like a lot of the American influence in Aussie sound, you know, in terms of the new wave, which was dope. And you're seeing a lot of guys now, like Manu Crooks influenced a lot of the guys who are popping now as well, like the guys like 1-4 and Hooligan Hef's Day One, a lot of the Polynesian scene, which like, just seeing that full circle moment where like a lot of the Polynesians and the New Zealand scene was really popping off, you know, when we were growing up, and we're seeing guys like Scribe and all that. And then it's kind of like going full circle, and it's just cool how it kind of interchanges and we bounce off each other in a way. But I feel like, yeah, just, I can go on a lot of different memories, just thinking of it. But yeah, I think they're ones that stand out immediately. But yeah.
Okay, thank you. And for any, I'm sure you have many, but some cherished or memorable moments over your career?
Yeah, I mean, there's a number, from moments in a recording studio to full shows. There's a particular moment that always resonates with me. I was playing Splendor, I think Splendor in the Grass, back with 1200 Techniques, like must be 2002, maybe, somewhere there. And we're playing Karma. And, you know, we'd played a lot of shows at this point. I've been through a lot. My brother had left Australia, wasn't in our group anymore, and he was integral to the formation of 1200s and wrote on a number of our first songs. That was my older brother, who was like my mentor in life, really. So it was me on stage with Simon, Peril, and Rick. And we had been on stage. And you get put on stages as an act, you get put on festivals, and people kind of watch, but they're not so sure. And then you start getting to those moments where people are actually there to see you. It's quite an interesting twist, change, and it's like, whoa. And there's a moment during the solo at the end of Karma where I saw this kind of wave of energy go across the audience, and it hit the stage and hit everybody, and everybody just started cheering out of nowhere, like this uplift happened. And it's like time stood still for a second, and I was thinking, this is amazing. Like, me with my dreads and how I am, I don't really think about how I'm perceived that way, but I had a moment of, I wouldn't probably know any of these people in this audience if it wasn't for this music. I probably wouldn't have shared space with most of these people ever in my life. I've had people come up to me after shows like that I would not know, would not be friends with, and probably never spoken to a person who looks like me, and like, yeah, I love your show, brother. You know, and it's like, okay, that's interesting, because the relationships can start growing. And I remember very much at the time, I would look left and right, and maybe you'd see Hal from Coolism. I remember when Scribe came on tour with us, you know, you're starting to see more color on stage that wasn't from overseas, it was local. And, but it was still very lonely space. And watching like more recently, because I remember thinking, man, I wish there was more cats out here, like that look like me. I'm a bit lonely up here. Watching the generations coming up and the talent coming up, hearing stories about being in Greece, seeing Thando roll through, seeing Sampa at the little record store to her winning arias to Glastonbury. All these little wins are massive for me. Every time I see something like that, it warms my heart in a way I can't explain. And, you know, I don't have family here. I don't really have a community here, to be honest, outside of music. So I watch from kind of afar. I try to get involved, but I still know I'm a bit of an outsider in a way, even though I'm on the inside. At least that's how I feel. So I see those wins, and I'm in the house punching the air with happiness whenever I see that stuff. That's really the drive still to this day. And it's interesting, sorry to talk too long, but you were talking about sort of creative and emotional safety. I feel like the thing that I loved about hip hop was that people were coming from a very unsafe space, talking about it, but that's something that's always come forward, is especially as a guy, and I think there's a lot of, just with artists in general, male or female, I've noticed there's always this sense of, I'm just going to be tough. So I see a lot of youth, especially, just talking tough. And it's like, that's not your vulnerability. You're hiding so much of it. There's so much pain I see in that, and it hurts me a lot. And I hope that youth coming up can not feel like they have to just be tough, act tough, talk tough, but can actually be themselves, because a lot of sweet kids go in the wrong way in order to sing tough, whether they're doing music or not. But that chase for those moments of joy, that moment on stage, little moments, interactions, seeing people feel something that you could have just gone, oh, this is nothing, this is crap, I'm not going to rap this, I'll delete it. I didn't delete it. Let's just put it out. Let's just get you into a life-changing situation. That's the magic.
100%. Some of it sounds, almost like it's hard to put in words, some of these moments. It's an energy, the feeling.
The way I mumble, yeah.
Thando, what about some of your memorable moments?
I'd probably say the most memorable that I can think of. Last year, I played a show to launch my new record, which is called Life in Color. Mm-hmm. And I'd been writing it over a couple of years, and it was just sort of chronicling my reclamation of my Blackness, because I grew up in Canberra and was just very isolated from the Black community in any capacity. So I'd just always been surrounded by whiteness. And I think the way that the kind of person that I became, I just sort of had a real sense of disconnection from how I looked. And I know that aesthetics aren't everything, but obviously if I present a certain way, I want to also be able to understand the weight of that and what that means, and to make sense of, Dr. Kathomi was talking about microaggressions and the weight of what those things can do to you, and being able to make sense of how to address them when they happen. So that's why I started writing this record, and, learning to be proud of my hair texture, learning to be proud of, the complexion of my skin. And this journey just sort of went from, I guess, music that was quite I guess, looking at things in the lens of the struggle and the pain, what we were just talking about, and sort of evolved into a celebration and a reclamation of that Blackness and finding my pride in that. Because through writing that record and recording it, I ended up falling pregnant with my child, and her father's white Australian. So I knew that the messages that come across in this record, I really wanted her to be able to be aware of what her identity is, you know, on both sides of things. And, you know, her lived experience was going to be different from mine. And there were things about her coming up that I was never going to be able to understand, and vice versa. And what kind of a responsibility I had through my music to communicate my understanding of that. So I think everything just kind of came to this beautiful manifestation of the lessons I'd learned over that 3 years with this live show, because I was able to sort of bring together every audience I'd cultivated over the last 8-9 years. So I very much had my, you know, my cabaret audience, my audience that would never dare to hear a song about, you know, identity politics, or, you know, you wouldn't mutter the words Black Lives Matter or talk about changing the date with this particular audience, just to give you an example. And then they were now in a room with people who had nurtured me and embraced me and invited me into this community and allowed me that space to find myself again. And it was just such a beautiful moment, because I was just unashamedly telling my stories, and I had my peers on stage sharing their stories as well. And just seeing those two parts of my life come together and realizing that this was such a significant moment and was probably going to make an impact on everyone, in a way of like knowing that it's okay to find yourself, and it might take you a little while to get there, but once you're there, celebrate it and to be proud of it. And I think the thing that I appreciate most about that record is, yeah, being able to be proud of being able to say, like, I'm Black, because like I am. I'm a Black woman. I'm very proud of that, and I know that what I represent, you know, to set an example for other young women, and it's really important to be able to stand in that power and to celebrate it and to acknowledge it, and yeah, just continue sharing stories about Black joy, Black love, and to share that and what that looks like for people and what their interpretation of it is. And yeah, so like, yeah, but that's my proudest moment, because yeah, I just felt like I didn't have two artistic identities after that time. I was just able to manifest this fully realized version of myself who, yeah, isn't afraid to just be the fullest version of themselves. So yeah.
Beautiful. That sounds like such a powerful moment. It sounds like, you know, emerging that I guess will continue, right? It continues on in your journey, in your life.
Absolutely, yeah.
So there was a couple more questions I wanted to get to, but I'm also just mindful of the time. So maybe I will just leave it with two more questions. One being, how do you find support and connection in the Aussie music space? Maybe I'll start again with you, Thando. You were just speaking about some of that support that you obviously gained and how that led to that powerful moment. So how have you found that over your career, finding support? And
just through community, through conversations and collaborations. I think when you open yourself up to receive from others, you find yourself being able to, I guess, yeah, nurture these genuine connections. You know, I've been knowing Anfa for a few years, and the opportunity to share the stage then obviously creates an opportunity to connect on a personal level. So, you know, being backstage and sharing stories and, you know, sharing experiences that we've had, you know, whether parallel or totally opposite, and being able to learn from each other. And I guess that unintentional mentoring that you get from people that have, you know, been in the scene and carved out a path that has made it what it's become for someone like me, and to be able to then again pass that on. I think yeah, being able to be open to collaborative experiences is the way that I've been able to connect with community and to be able to find myself. So yeah, it's really such an important part of coming up, you know, and not even just other musicians, but other like avenues through arts. So, you know, visual arts. So, you know, Atonga Tem is an incredible visual artist and photographer, and to be able to sort of see her stories through her art and have those conversations and to develop those connections. So I've been able to collaborate with her in my music in that way as well. And it's such an important part of being an artist and and again, the reclamation of that space and being able to be proud of who you are and to represent who you are, because we have to be able to support each other and uplift each other. You can't sort of stand on your own, especially with all the things that we struggle with and are still trying to overcome in this industry. So yeah, there's definitely power in numbers and support in numbers. So yeah, I just say collaboration is the best way to nurture those relationships for sure.
Amazing. Thank you. And Zig, what is your ways of connection and the ways that you felt supported?
Do you want me to go first, Zig?
Go ahead.
Look, I'm gonna sound like a sad old man, but like when it comes to industry, I would say I don't think for the majority of anything I've ever had support.
Okay. No, I think that's important to share.
It's always like, oh, you're right. Okay, everything must be okay. But I mean, the manager we had during 1200s, he's a great manager now. Back then, he was still learning, and he was pretty cool. You know, I think there's been like support for potentially for business sides of things, and I think through different people have had different potential labels, this and that, and the only things I've found, and I was thinking about that manager, and I just flashed back to a coffee we had once years ago, and he was checking in on me. And for the majority of my career, I don't think anybody checked in on me. Like, am I okay? And this is something I was thinking about with Zig and management. Like, a big thing is super important with labels or anything is the holistic side of management. Are your artists okay? How are they doing? Not is the numbers moving? And so I often used to act fine. I did it my whole childhood, acting fine, seeming fine. Hey, you know, I won the state championship, the national championship, I must be fine. You know what I mean? I'm at that dope private school on scholarship, I must be fine. But the amount of effort everything's ever taken for me to just be like, hey, you're doing cool. It's like, bro, I have to be the best in the country. I have to be almost the best in the world. Mm-hmm. You know, I've often felt like that. And I felt the same for others. And what I've had to do over the years is not need to feel support or recognition from a wide audience. I've had to really bring it down and narrow it to just, is my bro happy with me? Mm-hmm. Was my mother happy? Is my father, once we finally got to get close again, was he happy? You know, I got so twisted and mixed up in my 20s and stuff. I got really lost and almost became someone else because of this and just lack of support. And I reckon there are people out there feeling the same. When I met Sensible J, I remember saying to him, hey man, you hang out with me too long, you might become a monster. And he said to me, hang out with me too long, I'll make you a nice guy. And so I held on to that, and it's really been the case. Like, I was so lost and sad that I hadn't recognized it and really broken. You know, and there's multiple reasons why people have things. I just had a lot of people I was close to suddenly pass away, and a career kind of stop, and feeling just completely left outside and not welcome on a table I'd helped create and all these things. You know, it's just how I was feeling. I wasn't bitter and whingy. It's just I was like, damn, I don't know what to do. But once I narrowed it down and just was like, well, let me just keep this closer, then I began to be more careful. And even then, even in the last few years, I'd be trying, especially once I started seeing more, you know, African cats around, I'd be like, yo, and I didn't really think about, wait, what trauma are they going through? Do I remind them of a big weird uncle? And I'm like, no, it's just me, you know. And so I end up also getting hurt with people, like the way they would react, and going from being always, hey, blackie, hey, darkie, to suddenly someone way darker than me, like, hey, light skin to me. It's like, what the fuck? Yo, you know, like maybe they think I'm cool with it. I'm not cool with it. So it's been an interesting process of just going, okay, I can't reach and expect and have these ideas of what industry should be, what relationships should be. If I'm fortunate to have a few close friends, if I can quietly get to understand Zig and we have a moment where we start to connect, beautiful. I'm not going to overreach. Thando and I have some quiet moments, great. Let me not overreach. If labels, no one owes me anything. I've got Sensible J I can talk to, that's cool. And I just try and keep things closer. And I feel like that's where the support is. I mean, I've always tried to support others, but at the end of the day, if you're kind of fractured, it's hard to hold anyone else up. So I think it's important to just simplify, bring things closer to your heart, and just walk a quieter path. And I think that's where foundations become a lot stronger.
Thank you. That was a great
Sorry.
No, I think that was a great perspective to bring to this panel. That's what these panels are for.
100%.
Zig, what about your experiences?
Yeah, cause I think it's interesting the kind of notion that you're taking it in from, because when you say support, it could mean, it's various things, right? So at first I was thinking, all right, how has the industry supported us to further the career? You know what I mean? In a way, but directly that, especially with support acts, like how we supported each other, for instance, and things like that, not just career-wise, as human beings and as friends and family, so that's definitely interesting to note. And I think, a lot of the I grew up with my mother's Caucasian, my dad is African. So I kind of grew up in a different kind of household to some of the guys that I work with that are African, who might have two African parents. And I know already from the start, with being a musician, sometimes already their parents aren't cool with that from the start. You know what I mean? And it's kind of like, I feel like, and that's probably also, it is very similar with a lot of other cultures as well, especially when immigrant culture, where your fam has come overseas to come and try and get a better life for you, to to go and become a doctor or something like that. In their head, that's what they're thinking, and all of a sudden you're there in the studio every night, late night, waking up at 12 p.m. after a late night session and things like that. So there can always be those things, and that's kind of where I found myself kind of stepping in to kind of see, all right, that's a dream that you have as an artist. How can I help that and make this a reality? And even in the back of my head, a lot of my goals for a lot of the artists is like, how can you get to a place where you can literally say, I bought my mum a new car, or I bought my mum a house, for instance. And, they're kind of the golden goals that we want to get to, and I feel like it's achievable, but you have to really put that hard work in. And, sometimes with us as well, what we're starting to see now is a lot of us coming together and having these communal spaces where we can talk and open up. I feel like just being that voice, a lot of the building these kind of like community spaces, like for us, like we've now built a studio that has like various studios, and just a place where, because we've seen with one of our studios, it's just one room, and it was just like, all right, there's a session happening, that's all that can happen, there's that one energy. But now we've got a place that has multiple rooms, so it's like there's multiple sessions happening at the same time, where people are taking breaks. That's bringing worlds together, where now we can have these conversations, we can have these late night talks and things like that too, which I think, especially for artists, producers, engineers, I think that's also, where a lot of the industry sometimes doesn't put a lot of emphasis on. There's a lot of emphasis on artists. Obviously now there's some emphasis on producers, but then what about the engineers, the mixing guys, also the photographers and the videographers? Because it is really hard for them to make a living out of this creative industry as well. And so I guess for us, and I feel like that's where my role in particular is pretty integral, because I'm trying to build an ecosystem and an infrastructure within that can help feed all the different people around, you know what I mean? And I feel like that's kind of one of my main goals and big goals there too. So that's really why, for me, it's like I have to kind of bottle my emotions and not let things out, because there's a big job to do. There's a big job at hand, and it's like, we can't let kind of egos and all that stuff get in between. And it's just like, a lot of the time I'm very heads down, and a family man too. So it's balancing the family life as well with this kind of industry as well, which, I feel like for me, I'm the type of person that can do that, but I know this job is not easy. And, whenever I see a young manager say, hey, how you doing this, or what you doing? I'm like, this is not a good job, man. Are you prepared for this? Like, you got to have passion for this. You know what I mean? Like, because if you don't have passion, like, it'll probably break you for sure. So, and it really resonates with like when I was starting out, there was one guy, Ronnie Diamond, he told me like, this is the worst job, man. Like, you're going to be getting calls late at night, this and that. And, I'm like, oh, whatever, man, I want to do this, And then like fast forward a few years later, I'm like, man, what he said is actually true. But, if the passion is there, like you're going to you're going to take the negative with the positive, you know what I mean? But if the passion is not there, you're not going to be able to take it, you know? So, yeah.
That's awesome, because it sort of ties into the question that unfortunately we don't have time for now, but you've answered it anyway in some advice maybe for people that might be watching that want to enter this or on a journey into entering the music industry, you know, making sure that that passion, I guess their why is really strong, and so that that can stay, you know, as an undercurrent in their journey. Unfortunately, we have come to the end, and you know, I knew that it was going to be hard to cover all of the questions because I knew that we were going to be having such great conversation. Thank you so much for all being here. I really hope that all the attendees and the viewers really enjoy that. I really enjoyed that, and I'm really glad it's been recorded. I'm not sure if Ash is jumping back on to say a final goodbye.
I am. Yes.
Okay.
I'm just going to let everyone know that if you missed out on some of today's chat, we've recorded everything so you can find it in full via our Facebook page, and also keep an eye on our socials for our upcoming events. We've got more On My Mind sessions coming, as well as our First Nations dedicated sessions at Yarning Strong. I'd love to thank you everyone who's joined us here for this month's installment of On My Mind, being Black and Australian music, brought to you in partnership with Black Music Alliance Australia and with support from the Headspace app. A special thank to our incredible guests, Enfa, Thando, Zig, Dr. Kathomi, and Rashida. Thank you, everybody, for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
And as well, you know, Support Act, we're all here to support people who are out there living and working in Australian music. So you can find more about what we can offer you and how we can help at supportact.org.au. We've got personalised resources about mental health issues. And we also have a free confidential helpline that you can call 24/7, 1-800-959-500 for advice and support. We've also got resources online about how to support one another. So it doesn't just mean that you need to be going through something to learn or to seek advice. Just like Zig said, most of the things that help us and support our mental wealth and well-being and thriving are our relationships, are our connections, is the communities that we can find ourselves in. So we all have the capacity to help bring each other up. So let's really start building on that as we move forward into this industry. Thank you so much, everyone. Good afternoon.